What's up, guys? It's hot sauce time. Oh, that totally made sense. Honestly, back to here. Camp permission slips turned in this week. Articles, we'll talk more about that in a second. And 9 weeks ends this week. You do get 15 new points next week. You get your last final hall pass next week. And then we get into your last 9 weeks that you get to be a 7th grader with me. We have 2 grades this week. 1 tomorrow, 1 on Friday. The one tomorrow is going to be the assessment, which we'll talk about since I pushed it back. And then the other one is Friday, which will be a quiz over all 15 Olympians that we're going to go through and talk about. For reading, again, please read before tomorrow because you're not going to have time in class, especially if we have best tomorrow. That means your class is like 4 minutes shorter, which means you really have to make sure you push. So make sure you read and understand the articles. So again, on this one, you need to make sure you've read these 4 so you know what they're going to be. And then you're going to be going through and telling me of there, what is it the homeless man did? You're not telling me what happens in the article. I know it. I've read it. You're telling me which thing he chose. And then here, don't tell me what happened. Tell me which thing he chose. And then you're going to make sure you tell me how it connects to your life and you do a conclusion. That's all you have to do. Essentially, follow directions, read the articles, you're probably going to get an A. Don't read the articles or don't follow directions, then you don't have to worry about it. And we're good. That'll be tomorrow. Yay. From there. All right. Today, you should be almost done with the back of page 3. If you look on there, like I have that top part circled, but if you go down, like you know things like 42, which Olympian is the only one to be deformed and not perfect, you should know that part of it. So, like, look around on there.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Hepatitis?
Yes, hepatitis.
I got it.
Hopefully that helps. All right.
Wait, what is it? How do you get deformed?
Oh, no, the story we're in the middle of.
Well, I wasn't here.
Sounds like a you issue.
Cora, what is 42?
So as we go through, we're going to see the gods that you guys know so far and hand signs. Do not say the hand sign. Do the hand sign.
Let me pull her up. Hold on.
I mean, in theory, you shouldn't need to be looking at them because it should be in your brain. Since in a couple days, you're standing up and doing this in front of the class. So.
Okay, well, I have a couple days, so.
Yeah. Our first god that gets a throne? Zeus. And what is he the god of?
Thunder.
Next one to get a throne?
Hera.
And for her we say Queen.
God.
Yes, Queen. Nicely done. Our next one to get a throne?
Poseidon.
For him we say
Water.
God of ocean.
Squid Lord, god of oceans. Our next one to get a throne? And why is he not up there?
Because he's antisocial.
Our next one to keep a throne?
Demeter.
And for sure she is
God of
Gods and
best law knowing ever. And then after her, the next one to get a throne? Why is she not up there?
I don't know.
She's nice.
Alright.
What was she the god of?
The heart.
And then we have fire.
And the fire.
I love fire.
So she's gone. Oh, how many kids do Zeus and Hera have?
Really? A lot.
4.
77.
4.
4.
How many boys?
2.
How many girls?
2.
How many become Olympians?
4.
None.
2.
2. Which ones?
Hephaestus and
And
Aries.
that's why we get to our next 2.
Twins.
Hephaestus, not twins, they're brothers. Hephaestus and Aries. Not the 2 girls, because again, sexism. So they don't get to. Instead, remember what special job Hebe gets?
Who's
Hebe, his daughter.
Hebe.
Is that where we got cut off with you guys?
We got cut off.
Okay.
We got cut off before that. We got cut off. We didn't get
Yeah,
cut off.
Hestia.
We didn't even get those yet.
Yeah,
We got Hestia. We're finished with Hestia, but we haven't gotten to
Because we were talking about the Hestia's fire, and then the school fire happened, and you were like, oh, that's probably the vaping kid.
That was me.
That was me.
No, it's him.
You didn't even post the video.
Yeah, why
you
did you
didn't-
post
Can
the
you go back and
video?
please post the video?
Because I recorded a different class, so.
Say blooper.
So, back to here, we'll try to keep this one. Fingers crossed. So, Hestia ends up giving up her throne for one of the other gods coming along, which will be a story that we're going to get to coming up this week. So that explains why you guys were so confused on the kids thing. So at this point, Zeus wants to fill in the rest of his throne, but he's out of brothers and sisters. So if you're out of brothers and sisters, who do you use as your next people?
Kids.
Children. So he decides he's going to fill them in with his kids. So he and Hera start having kids, and you can look on the little white sheet, or you can pay attention to the answers we just gave you. How many kids did he and Hera have?
4.
Correct. Now, if I said how many kids does Zeus have,
78.
that's a different answer.
Million.
But Zeus and Hera, they only have 4. 2 boys, 2 girls. And the 2 girls are Hebe and Olympian, and then the 2 boys are Hephaestus and Ares. And again, sexism. The boys get to become Olympians, although one of them has a thing he has to go through. The girls don't. Olympian has it slightly worse off because he literally just sort of throws her away. And it's like, girl child, phew, and tosses her. Hebe gets it slightly better, where he invites Hebe up to Mount Olympus. He's like, hey, hon, can you come up to Mount Olympus? And she's like, I get a throne. And she comes running up there, and she's like, which throne is mine? And he goes, you're not getting a throne. She goes, well, then why am I up here? He goes, well, sometimes, sweetie, the men folk are going to get thirsty. And sometimes we're going to need someone to bring us something to drink. So whenever that happens, we're going to lift our hand and snap. When that happens, you need to run to the fridge and bring us our favorite beverages. That becomes your job. So Hebe's job is
The waitress.
the waitress or the maid of Mount Olympus. And so that is the job she gets to have. So she gets to hang out with Olympians, but not actually be an Olympian. But it's okay because she's a girl. Now, our 2 boys, that's a whole different thing. Hephaestus and Ares, his sons, they do get to have thrones. And with Hephaestus, we already know some things about him, which would be...
His name is
He's
hard to
like
say.
old and crippled.
He's crippled.
Volcano.
And
He's
He
the
lives
god
in
of
a
volcano.
good.
Of the
When he
wielding
hits
and
it,
building.
He's
got a crutch.
He's
volcanoes.
crippled.
So cool.
And he's,
Volcanoes.
He's
Wally.
crippled, he's crippled.
and he's a blacksmith.
He's ugly.
He has that one thing.
So he is the god of metalsmiths, so the god of blacksmiths, which is why we have... Turns out him being crippled, him being ugly, and him being a blacksmith are all part of the same story. So that's the story we get to get into here in a moment. Since we were robbed last week from Hestia. So I guess it was fitting that it was right before Hephaestus, being as he does have fire all around him. For the hand sign, almost every time we see Hephaestus, as in there, and then back over
The
here,
Iron Man.
you see him doing pretty much the same thing, and this is where you're going to be wielding your hammer. Not lightning bolt, that's different. So lightning bolt, you just pose and then maybe do a little water sprinkler. But for Hephaestus, you just have to sit there and hammer. And this is where we discover that many of you should never use a hammer. You're like, I'm hammering. Like, you're getting a concussion. So here's our story.
I'm really good.
One day, Zeus got into a big argument with Hera about his friendships. And Hera got quite upset with him, and they were yelling back and forth. And their young son, a kid by the name of Hephaestus, stumbles upon mom and dad yelling at each other. And Hephaestus puts himself in the middle of the argument and starts yelling at Zeus also. And it was like, you're a bad daddy, no one loves you, you shouldn't be friendly. Zeus is already upset at Hera for the fact that he got caught, really upset with his son for yelling at him. So Zeus expresses his anger by picking up his young son, yelling into his face, holding him above his head, and then throwing him. Now I'll tell you, I'm not personally against throwing children. I threw my own when they were small. I would pick them up and we'd throw them into the air and play a game called Astronaut, where you throw them onto the big bed in the parents' room, like whee, and they bounce on the bed. We called it Astronaut. Sometimes you miss the bed, but that happens with astronauts. Zeus, a little bit different. He plays a different form of astronaut because when he throws his child, the child becomes an astronaut. And he throws him hard enough that he goes off the top of the mountain and goes flying across into the middle of nowhere, into the big open sea that is out there in the middle. Hephaestus realizes he's made a poor choice and is flapping his little arms, flappy, 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 thinking he's going to hit the water and drown. But luckily, there's an island. So he tries to steer himself with his little arms so that he can land on the island. And he succeeds. But when he hits the island, he lands with a whole impact into one leg. And when he does, it goes kapoof, and all the bones shatter. He then flips over and slides upon his face, and it becomes all gravel burn all across his face. So he gets crippled and uglified. And the thought is, fine, gods can heal from this. And they can. But when they're young, they had to have this special stuff called God Gatorade, which was nectar and ambrosia. And nectar and ambrosia are these special liquids that you had to combine, and it's what gave gods the ability to heal, especially when they were wee little children. Zeus is so upset with Hephaestus, he refuses to let Hephaestus have nectar and ambrosia. He forbids any god from giving him nectar and ambrosia, and says this kid is outlawed, he is not allowed to come back, he is stuck on this island, and no one is allowed to help him. Because of that, Hephaestus' leg does not grow back right. It grows back like an accordion, those little musical instruments like and so whenever he would walk around, it would make like a little winging sound, and his face was all ugly, so he'd walk in circles and be like, and he eventually grows up on this island all by himself, getting angry and bitter. Till one day, there's this giant mountain that's been on there that he's never bothered to climb because of the one leg. And he hears at the top of the mountain thunder that's just making this huge booming sound. So who does he know is up there?
Daddy.
He hears Dad up there, and he's like, I am going to confront my father and get in his face and yell at him about the fact that he crippled me. So he starts climbing the mountain, but it takes a long time because one leg is short. So he would climb up the mountain, and then his short leg would take him back down again. And then he'd go up the mountain, and his short leg would take him back down again. And he was like, I wish I had two legs. And he eventually gets all the way to the top, but Zeus is not there. And he realizes that the thunder is not coming from outside the mountain, but actually from inside the mountain. And he thinks it's weird that his dad's making thunder inside of the mountains, but out of curiosity, he starts to travel inside of it until he finds this gigantic open cavern in the middle. In there, he finds three humongous creatures working at a gigantic forge. Those three creatures being
Cyclops.
the three Cyclops. And when he sees them, the Cyclops have no idea about Zeus's decree because they don't care, because they don't follow Zeus's law because they're bigger and older than him. So all they see is a wee little ugly crippled boy. But of course they only have one eyeball and they have their own ugly issues. So they decide to bring him in and they adopt young Hephaestus. And they start teaching him how to do the thing that they're really good at. And the thing they're really good at is
Making weapons.
so they start to train Hephaestus. And it turns out Hephaestus takes to it really well and becomes exceptionally skilled. And because he's smaller than the Cyclops, he is even better at making weapons for the other Olympians than even the Cyclops were, because he can do fine detail work that they could not. Zeus is eventually so impressed, he brings Hephaestus back up to Mount Olympus and gives him a throne and apologizes in a story that's coming up in just a moment. And he gives him a gift. And Hephaestus forgives him after the gift. So at this point, Hephaestus now has a throne. His brother Ares always has a throne because Ares is the god of war. Again, over there, this is going to be Ares, who has his little pop-pop on a leash. He's also the one over here in this corner area who's wearing the full armor. Over here, he's right behind Whenever, again in full armor. Unlike with Athena, who had multiple things she was the god of, Ares only has one. And that one thing is
War.
And it's all he cared about. War, fighting, and killing. Surprisingly enough, the god of war was also a jerk and not a very nice person. I know, you thought, what? I thought he'd be a sweetie. Nope. Turns out almost no gods liked him. Even other Olympians did not like him because he would get into fights and then cry. He fought dirty. He was not very respectful, so most gods looked down on him as far as one of the gods would go. Now, I want you to remember he's the god of war, but also a gigantic wussy at the same time. So I have a special hand sign that we're going to do for him, which connects to my childhood and how I learned to fight when I was a kid. So, being the wee child I was, no, that's a slap fight. That's not a thing to teach you, silly kids. So when I was a kid, I was the smart child with the big brain, and I learned that if you get into a fight, because sometimes smart kids get bullied, because bullies are jerks, a couple things. Figure out which arm is your dominant punching arm, whichever one your strong one is, and then you're going to use that to protect your neck, because that's the squishy bits that people come after. So you take your dominant one and you just sort of like leave it as a guard, so it's kind of hard to get to, but it still leaves your arm out. But then also, your brain is where all the thinking bits are, and you have to protect that also. And I saw football players always wearing a helmet, and I thought that was genius. So I decided to build my own helmet. So what you do is you protect your neck and protect your face, and then it gives you one arm free for swinging, and then that way when the bully comes at you, your face is protected, your neck is protected, and yet you can swing, and it makes things much easier. If you don't think this is effective, I can tell you, you're wrong. Trust me. If a bully ever steps up to you, and a bully's like, "Come on, punk," and you're like, "Okay, you and me." When the bully hits the ground laughing, it buys you a lot of time to run. By the time he's like, what? Where'd he go? And you're like, and you are running. And you're like, "Thank you, Mr. Brovicast." And like, I've got you. That is your wuss fighter stance. When you guys go to camp next month, if you end up having a hero as your counselor, and you ask them what is it you remember from Mr. Brovicast's class, I guarantee you one of the three things they are going to say is they're going to go, "I don't remember." Oh, wait. For some reason, that seems to stick with kids. I'm guessing it's because they get into a lot of fights in high school, and they always see kids in the hallway doing that, and they're like, "Mr. Brovicast," and they're like, "Oh, thank God he saved that kid's life." So Hephaestus and Ares are our next ones. Problem is, he doesn't want to give thrones to Olympian and Hebe because, girls. So because of that, he decides that who else is he going to give the thrones to?
Those random kids that just showed up and he doesn't know who they are.
Yeah, other children that he definitely has
No idea who they
no
are.
connection to at all. Yeah, all the rest of them except for one are going to be filled in with his other children. Starting with the twins, Artemis and Apollo.
I know those.
I do too. So to point to them, big poster wise, this is Artemis and Apollo back over here. Behind Smithy, we have Artemis and Apollo as their two right there. And then behind Dimitri, Artemis and Apollo. By the way, if you look at their pictures, what is the big things they represent?
Sun, moon.
Because they were twins, the gods thought they were, or the humans thought they were also the gods of sun and moon. Because they thought the sun and the moon were also like twins that were connected to each other. Here's our story. This deals with a Titan girl by the name of Leto, L-E-T-O. Zeus had a crush on Leto and thought she was a wee bit of a hottie. Unfortunately for him, Leto was not an idiot, and she knew that being friendly with Zeus led to his wife trying to kill you. So when Zeus tries to hit on Leto, she throws a hand in his face and goes, "Get to stepping. Ain't gonna happen. I ain't no dum-dum." And he goes, "Fine," and he completely moves on and forgets about her. Kidding! He goes and hides behind trees and then creepily watches her, because that's what you do when you're a creepy man. And he just sits back and watches her for the next several days. And he sees that she keeps playing with all these swans that are out on this nearby pond.
Oh.
And he's like, she's playing with all these swans. I have an idea. So Zeus turns himself into a gigantic swan and goes out there where all these other swans are, and he swans his way up to the middle and starts knocking the other swans out of the way. He's like, "Swan! Swan!" And all the other swans like get knocked to the side, and he comes up and he's like, swan, and goes up right next to her. Leto is surprised by this rather large and frisky swan. And she's like, hey, Swan, how are you? And he's like, Swan. And she's like, wow, you're quite the swan. So she ends up like playing catch and like taking like little pieces of food and throwing it. And the swan's like, hey. She's like, creepy. And she's like riding around on the swan's back. And by the end of the day, she looks at the swan and she's like, Swan, I think I love you. You're like the best swan I've ever hung out with. It's almost like you're a person in a swan's body. Actually, I kind of wish you were a person. It's too bad you're a swan. And the swan went, Swan? And all of a sudden became Zeus. Leto's like, what? Swan? You were Zeus the whole time. And he goes, how you doing? And she's like, oh, Zeus.
Oh boy.
And they're friendly.
And
After their friendliness, turns out she becomes pregnant. Which is when Hera finds out, because that's what Hera does. And Leto's like, I was so smart. And then he swanned me. So Hera shows up and starts getting in Leto's face. And she's like, girlfriend, you done been friendly with my man. And Leto goes like, well, it's not my fault. He was a swan. Hera says, that does not make it better. That makes it creepier. She's like, oh, you weren't there. She's like, oh, thank goodness. So they start yelling at each other back and forth and having a big fight. And Hera goes, all right, here's our issue. Because you are friendly with my man, I have to make an example of you. So no other woman is friendly with my man. I'm going to teach you a lesson. And Leto goes, I've learned my lesson. I'm not going to be friendly with him again. She goes, yeah, that's not how it works. While your feet are on my man's kingdom, you can't stop running. You're going to have to keep running as long as you are in his kingdom. Leto says, how are you going to make me run? I'm just going to go, no, and cross my arms. Hera goes, oh, that's fine. I'm going to have my friend, the giant python, which comes shooting up out of the ground. Smack. Hiss. And it goes like, this is going to attack you. And if you don't run, it's going to gobble you. And then you're going to get to live inside its tum-tum. Snakey, get her. And Leto goes, ee, and takes off running. And the snake goes, ee, and takes off running after her. And she starts to run. And the running takes days, and then weeks, and then months, and then years. And she just gets pregnanter and pregnanter while she's running. To the point where she's been running for decades, and her belly just keeps coming up in front of her, and she's like, and having to push it to the side as she runs. Every time she goes by Mount Olympus, she yells up at Zeus, and she's like, I blame you. And he is like, I feel kind of responsible for that. Oh, well, not my problem. And he just keeps watching it happen. Till one day, he finally breaks down and feels bad. And he goes, all right, I will help you. Here's my plan. He goes, well, so to make this work, I Googled pregnant woman running.
Oh, no.
I found a picture. I couldn't believe it either. But yeah, I found a picture of a pregnant woman running. So, yay me. He goes, what you're going to do is run to the edge of this cliff and then jump off of it and land on a nearby island. And everyone knows islands are connected to my kingdom via a land string. Common knowledge. I'm then going to have my brother come up, break the land string, thus separating it from my kingdom, breaking the curse, and then you can give birth. She goes, I hope this works. And he goes, me too. Good luck. And she goes, oh, I also typed in running snake. I was pretty happy with what I found on that one, so go me. And she runs to the edge, jumps onto the island. The snake gets ready to leap off the edge and land next to her when Zeus's brother jumps up, and Zeus's brother and does his little dance, dancey dance, dances, tick-tock, and breaks the little land string. When he does, the curse immediately ends, and the snake loses track of her. And she turns around and looks, and the snake is like, she goes, yeah, and gives birth to two full-grown children. Plop, plop, and both these full-grown children come plopping out of her. These kids are a little angry because they spent their entire childhood in mommy's tum-tum. So the first thing they want to do is kill the giant snake that was chasing them. So they decide to shoot it. So they both build bow and arrows so they can shoot the snake. Well, Mr. Brovicast, where do they get bow and arrows from? I'm glad you asked. The trees nearby, and they break down the branches and start to make them. Well, where'd they get a string from? They were born with it. They literally just reached down, grabbed that built-in little cord, and went snap, and then tied it onto their bow. When I was reading it, it was my favorite. I was like, what? That's awesome. So they made their own bow and arrows using their umbilical cords. And then they pull them back, they shoot the snake, and dunk, dunk, kill it. Umbilical cords happen when you wiggle your fingers at somebody. And they end up killing the snake dead. Hera actually feels a little bad and feels a connection to the kids. She still hates Leto, and Leto needs to die in a hole. But she feels bad for Artemis and Apollo. Because where did they spend their childhood? Where did Hera spend her childhood? So she goes, you know what? I have a connection to kids who are forced to grow up in their parents' tum-tum, so I'm actually okay with them getting to be Olympians. So she agrees to let Artemis and Apollo become the next two Olympians. Not Leto, she can die in a hole, but Artemis and Apollo get to become the next two. And they represented the sun and the moon because of them being twins. They also represent archery because of how they killed the snake. Artemis goes on to be the god of hunting. So if you ever wanted to go out and have something to eat, you would end up praying to her. She was also the god of the moon and the god of single ladies. Like marrying single ladies. But because of what happened to her mom, she refused to ever get married. And she actually becomes the god of single women. So for her hand sign, because she was the god of hunting, you're going to channel your inner Katniss Everdeen and pull back your bow and arrow. Which again, shows that many of you guys have never shot. Mr. Brovicast, I'm using a bow and arrow. And so, her brother Apollo, we're going to get to tomorrow. And then, oh wait, not tomorrow. Wednesday! Because what are we doing tomorrow?
A regular day.
A regular day. Hey, that's all! Chili sauce?
That's all.
Bye.
Folks.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.